Just before I sat down to write this, I brewed myself a cup of coffee. It's a ritual, you know? The smell, the warmth, that first sip that really kicks the day into gear. And as I held that steaming mug, I couldn't help but think about something truly extraordinary. Something we all participate in, every single day, without ever really stopping to marvel at it. Think about this coffee. It didn't just magically appear. Those beans traveled thousands of miles from a farm, maybe in Brazil or Ethiopia, where someone carefully cultivated and harvested them. Then they were processed, dried, roasted, perhaps in some massive facility or a small artisanal roastery. After that, they were packaged, loaded onto ships, then trucks, crossing oceans and continents. They passed through countless hands: farmers, pickers, sorters, roasters, distributors, customs agents, truck drivers, retail clerks. And that's just the beans? What about the mug I'm holding? The ceramic clay, mined from the earth, shaped, fired, glazed. The electricity that powered my kettle, generated perhaps hundreds of miles away. The water itself, piped from who knows where. It's an almost unimaginable web of activity, isn't it? Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people, all playing their tiny, specialized part. They don't know each other. They probably don't even know or care that I'm sitting here, enjoying this specific cup of coffee. There's no global coffee CEO orchestrating every single step, from the exact moment a cherry is picked to the moment it's poured into my mug. No grand central plan, no single mind in charge of this immense, intricate dance of production and distribution. Yet, here it is, reliably available, affordable, and often quite delicious. It just happens. But how? How do all these disparate efforts, driven by individual motivations, somehow coalesce into this incredibly efficient, global system that delivers nearly everything we consume? It's a genuine miracle of cooperation, an economic phenomenon that underpins our entire modern existence. This profound mystery, this seemingly spontaneous order that arises from individual actions, was the very question that fascinated a brilliant Scottish philosopher more than 250 years ago. His name was Adam Smith. In 1776, a year synonymous with a certain declaration of independence across the Atlantic, Smith published a monumental work, an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. Most of us just call it The Wealth of Nations. This wasn't just a book, it was a revelation. Smith, with an unparalleled clarity, was the first to truly articulate the fundamental principles governing this intricate, almost magical, system. He saw beyond the individual transactions and recognized the invisible forces at play, the self-interest, the division of labor, the power of markets that, when left largely undisturbed, guide human behavior towards a collective good, creating wealth and prosperity on an unprecedented scale. He laid bare the operating system of the modern economy, before a modern economy as we know it even fully existed. So, if you've ever wondered why some nations prosper while others struggle, or how something as simple as your smartphone can bring together materials and labor from dozens of countries, Adam Smith's work holds the answers. This isn't just history, it's the timeless blueprint for wealth and progress that profoundly shapes our lives, our economies, and every single purchase we make, even today. We're about to peel back the layers of this extraordinary book, unraveling its insights and discovering the core ideas that explain the secret behind literally everything you buy. Get ready, because once you see the world through Adam Smith's eyes, you'll never look at your morning coffee, or any other product, the same way again. You'll start to see the magnificent, invisible hand at work, shaping our entire world. No, there are some books that just stick around. Not just on dusty library shelves, but truly embedded in the very fabric of our understanding of the world. They become almost mythological, whispered about, referenced constantly, even if most of us haven't actually cracked their spines. And then there are those rare, monumental few that, a quarter millennium later, still quietly, profoundly shape the very systems and societies we live within. Adam Smith's An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations is without a doubt one of those. It's a book that truly runs the world, even if we rarely acknowledge its author by name. When you hear the name Adam Smith, the immediate mental jump for most people is usually to phrases like father of economics, the invisible hand, or perhaps some vague, often caricatured, idea about ruthless capitalism and the glorification of pure greed. And honestly, for the longest time, that's exactly where my own brain defaulted. I pictured a forbidding, incredibly dense tome, a relic of academic philosophy, likely a dry, utterly unfeeling defense of cutthroat markets, an intellectual justification for pure, unfettered self-interest. It sounded, frankly, utterly uninviting, like a mandatory, spirit-crushing assignment from a very strict, very humorless tutor. But here's the crucial piece of the puzzle, something often lost in the simplification. Adam Smith wasn't primarily an economist in the specialized, data-driven way we understand the term today. Long before The Wealth of Nations became his magnum opus, he was a revered moral philosopher, a brilliant professor at the University of Glasgow, deeply concerned with ethics, with justice, and with the intricate ways human beings interact and organize themselves within a society. He was, at his core, a profound and empathetic observer of human nature, seeking to understand the underlying principles of social order. And what an extraordinary, tumultuous time to be observing. Picture Scotland in the burgeoning mid-1700s. The air practically crackled with the raw energy of profound societal transformation. The first rudimentary steam engines were just beginning to puff their way into industrial prominence. Textile mills and workshops were slowly, relentlessly starting to spring up, transforming landscapes and lives, and the ancient, agrarian ways of life were giving way to something entirely unprecedented: the vibrant, often chaotic, dawn of the Industrial Revolution. Smith wasn't merely conjuring theories from an ivory tower, he was actively watching this seismic shift unfold right before his very eyes. He saw masses of people moving from rural villages to bustling, grimy cities, engaging in increasingly specialized labor, exchanging goods and services across ever-widening distances. He saw nascent markets taking shape, complex webs of transactions emerging, and he wrestled with some of the most fundamental questions of his age. Why were some nations accumulating immense wealth and power, while others remained trapped in cycles of poverty? What were the true drivers of prosperity for entire populations? My own journey with this monumental book was, to put it mildly, a revelation. Instead of the cold, calculating, almost inhuman treatise I had so firmly expected, what I found nestled within its pages was something utterly, breathtakingly different. It's a profound, deeply human story about cooperation, not just the relentless grind of competition. It's about the incredible, liberating power of individual freedom, yes, but equally about the intricate, often unseen mechanisms of empathy, mutual dependence, and shared interest that enable complex societies to not just survive, but to truly flourish. Smith, far from advocating for an every man for himself, anarchic free-for-all, was meticulously exploring how individual actions, often indeed driven by personal self-interest, could inadvertently, almost magically, lead to collective prosperity and societal benefit. But, and this is key, it was always within a foundational framework of justice, moral sentiment, and well-defined institutions. He painted a vivid picture of a world where specialization of labor, the simple act of exchange, and free trade weren't merely efficient economic processes, but were deeply, intrinsically human acts that fostered connection, innovation, and interdependence among strangers. It revealed a deeply optimistic, yet realistic, view of humanity's capacity to build and create together. So, in this video series we're going to undertake a fascinating intellectual expedition. We're going to peel back those 250 years of accumulated misinterpretation, simplification, and often outright distortion. We'll start by truly understanding who Adam Smith, the moral philosopher, was, and the specific, electrifying world he inhabited. Then, we'll dive deep into some of The Wealth of Nations' most enduring and often misunderstood core ideas, what Smith actually meant by the famously invoked invisible hand. It's likely not what you think: his revolutionary insights into the profound impact of the division of labor, the often debated role of government in a flourishing economy, and why he held such a strong conviction that free trade could be a powerful engine for universal betterment. Crucially, we'll also explore his often overlooked concerns about inequality, the dangers of monopolies, and the corrupting influence of unchecked power, aspects of his work that are incredibly relevant today. By the end of this journey, my sincere hope is that you'll not only possess a much clearer, more nuanced, and historically accurate understanding of the wealth of nations, but you'll also gain a genuinely fresh, enlightened perspective on the fundamental economic and social forces that quietly, yet powerfully, shape your daily life and the world around you. You'll begin to see how these 18th century insights still resonate with astonishing clarity and relevance in our complex, interconnected modern world. And perhaps, most importantly, you'll gain a deeper appreciation for the complex, surprisingly human, and deeply philosophical story that lies beneath the often dry label of economics. It's a story that isn't just about money, or markets, or nations. Ultimately, it's a story about us. All right, settle in, because we're diving straight into what many consider the beating heart of Adam Smith's masterpiece, The Wealth of Nations. It's where he lays out the fundamental engine driving prosperity, an idea so powerful yet seemingly simple, the division of labor. Forget grand economic theories for a moment. Smith starts with something tangible, something you can almost see and touch. He takes us to a pin factory. Now, imagine a lone individual trying to make a pin from scratch. Think about it: they'd have to draw out the wire, straighten it, cut it, point one end, grind the top to receive the head, make the head itself, and then attach it. It's a painstaking process, requiring different tools and skills, and honestly, our hypothetical lone worker might struggle to make even a single pin in a day, perhaps 2 or 3 at best. They'd be constantly switching tasks, reorienting themselves, fumbling with tools. But Smith's genius was in observing what happened when those tasks were divided. In the pin factory, he describes 10 men, each specialized in just 1 or 2 of those operations, one drawing the wire, another straightening it, a third cutting, a fourth pointing, a fifth grinding for the head, others making the head, and still others attaching it, or even just packaging. These 10 men, by dividing the labor among them, could collectively produce upwards of 48,000 pins in a single day. That's not just an increase, that's an exponential explosion in output. From perhaps a few dozen pins for 10 individual workers, to nearly 5,000 each when combined. It's almost unbelievable until you unpack how it works. Smith identifies 3 key reasons for this incredible boost in productivity. First, there's the increase in dexterity. When you perform the same simple operation over and over, you become incredibly good at it. Your hand and eye become perfectly coordinated, your movements fluid and efficient. Think of it as developing muscle memory for a very specific task. You're not just faster, you're more precise, wasting less material. Second, there's the saving of time. The lone pin maker loses time, constantly shifting from one kind of work to another, laying down one tool and picking up another. But in a specialized setup, there's no need for this switching. Each worker remains focused on their single task, eliminating those costly moments of transition and mental reorientation. Every second saved across multiple workers multiplies into significant gains. And third, and perhaps most fascinatingly, specialization encourages the invention of machinery. When a task is broken down into its simplest components, it becomes much easier to see how a machine could perform that single, repetitive action. The workers themselves, intimately familiar with their specific process, often come up with ingenious ways to make their work easier and faster, leading to the development of tools and machines that further amplify output. This isn't just about speed, it's about making them smarter. Now jump forward a couple of centuries. This 18th century insight into pins is not some quaint historical footnote. It's the very bedrock of our modern world. Think about your own career, or most careers for that matter. We live in an age of incredible specialization. You don't go to a general practitioner for brain surgery, you go to a neurosurgeon, a specialist whose entire career is dedicated to that intricate domain. Lawyers specialize in tax, criminal, or corporate law. Software engineers specialize in front-end, back-end, data science. This division of intellectual labor allows us to achieve far more complex and advanced outcomes than any generalist ever could. And physically, look at any modern assembly line, cars, smartphones, refrigerators. It's the pin factory principle writ large, on an industrial scale. Components are manufactured in different factories, sometimes in different countries, each specializing in a specific part or process, before being brought together for final assembly. Your phone, sitting in your hand, is a global testament to the division of labor, from rare earth minerals to microchips to the screen, assembled globally. Our global supply chains are an incredibly complex, interconnected web of specialized labor. But Smith, being the astute observer he was, also saw the potential downside. He famously noted that a man whose whole life is spent performing a few simple operations, with no occasion to exert his understanding or exercise his invention, becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. He feared the potential for what he called the mental mutilation of workers trapped in endlessly repetitive tasks. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? The very engine of wealth could, for some, come at the cost of intellectual atrophy. This isn't just an ancient concern, it resonates with modern discussions about job satisfaction, automation's impact, and even universal basic income. Smith, while celebrating the power of efficiency, didn't shy away from acknowledging its human cost. So the division of labor, a powerful force that transforms individual efforts into collective abundance, a cornerstone of wealth, yet one that demands we remain mindful of its profound impact on the human spirit. It's a concept that is both liberating and, in its extreme, potentially limiting. And understanding this duality is key to grasping the true breadth of Smith's vision. Right, so we've set the stage, talked about Smith's world and his grand project. Now, let's dive headfirst into what is undoubtedly the most famous, and perhaps most frequently misunderstood, idea from The Wealth of Nations, the invisible hand. It's a concept that has been both celebrated as a cornerstone of modern economics and maligned as a justification for pure, unchecked greed. But what did Smith actually mean by it? He famously wrote, and you've probably heard this quote before, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest." Pause there for a moment. This sentence, simple as it sounds, is profoundly counterintuitive, especially for his time. Before Smith, many saw economic activity, especially trade, as a zero-sum game, or believed that moral behavior in the market relied solely on the goodwill of individuals. Smith, with this single observation, flipped that on its head. He wasn't saying that butchers, brewers, or bakers are inherently bad people, nor was he suggesting we shouldn't value benevolence. Far from it, what he was keenly observing was a fundamental, practical driver of human action. People are primarily motivated to improve their own lives and circumstances. When you go to buy meat, bread, or beer, you're not relying on the seller's kindness or generosity for your sustenance. You're relying on the undeniable fact that they want to make a living. They want to provide for their families, pay their bills, perhaps save for retirement or expand their business. And to do that successfully, they need to offer you something you genuinely want, at a quality you expect, and at a price you're willing to pay. Their personal desire to prosper, their regard to their own interest, creates a powerful and consistent incentive to serve your needs effectively. Now let's be absolutely crystal clear about what Smith meant by self-interest. This is precisely where a lot of the misinterpretation and criticism happens. He was emphatically not advocating for unbridled, selfish, or cutthroat greed. No, not at all. For Smith, self-interest was a much broader, more nuanced and inherently human concept. It's simply the natural, innate human desire to better one's own condition. Think about it. Why do you work hard at your job? Why do you strive to learn new skills or pursue education? Why do you save money and plan for the future? It's typically because you want to improve your life, to secure your future, to provide for those you care about, and perhaps achieve a higher standard of living. This fundamental drive for self-improvement is a universal aspect of human nature, and Smith saw it not as inherently evil, but as a powerful, positive force when channeled correctly. It's about ambition, about providing, about striving to make your corner of the world a little bit better for yourself and your loved ones. Let's bring this powerful idea into the modern world, with an example we can all readily relate to: the competitive restaurant industry. Imagine a vibrant city bustling with hundreds, even thousands, of restaurants, from quaint cafes to Michelin-starred establishments. Each owner, each chef, each member of staff is, at their core, driven by their own self-interest. They want their particular restaurant to succeed. They want to attract loyal customers, make a healthy profit, expand their business, and perhaps even earn critical acclaim. How do they achieve this in a free and open market? Well, they certainly can't force you to eat at their establishment. So they compete vigorously. They constantly strive to offer delicious food, innovative menus, competitive prices, exceptional service, and a welcoming ambience. One restaurant tries a daring new culinary concept, another perfects a signature dish with locally sourced ingredients, a third focuses on lightning-fast, reliable delivery. Each of these actions, undertaken by individual restaurant owners in their individual pursuit of success and profit, has an unintended, yet profoundly positive, consequence for society as a whole. Consumers, like you and me, benefit immensely from this dynamic. We get a vast array of choices, consistently better quality food, more reasonable prices, and continually improved service. The intense competition, fueled by individual self-interest, leads to an overall elevation in the dining experience for everyone. No single restaurant owner woke up thinking, "Today I will single-handedly improve the culinary landscape of this entire city." No, they woke up thinking, "Today I need to make my restaurant the best it can be to attract and retain customers." And yet, collectively, driven by their individual pursuits, they achieve that broader societal good. That, my friends, is the invisible hand at work, guiding individual efforts towards collective prosperity without any central planning or benevolent dictate. However, and this is an absolutely critical point often overlooked, Smith was not so naive as to suggest that this mechanism works automatically or perfectly in a vacuum. The invisible hand is not a mystical force that magically turns bad intentions into good outcomes, nor is it a justification for complete deregulation. Far from it. Smith explicitly stated that this system, driven by self-interest, absolutely requires a robust foundation of justice and fair play to function properly and prevent exploitation. He understood perfectly that without a strong legal framework, laws that clearly protect private property rights, enforce contracts reliably, and justly punish fraud, theft, or coercion, self-interest could very easily devolve into rampant exploitation, the creation of harmful monopolies, and ultimately, societal chaos. If a butcher could routinely cheat customers with impunity, if a brewer could knowingly sell tainted products without consequence, or if a baker could steal recipes and ingredients from competitors without fear of legal repercussion, then the entire beneficial system would utterly break down. The very competition that drives positive outcomes would be corrupted and undermined, leading to distrust and economic stagnation. So the government, for Smith, had a vital, albeit limited and specific, role to establish and meticulously maintain the rule of law, to ensure a truly level playing field where individuals could pursue their self-interest ethically and productively, without infringing on the rights of others or resorting to unfair practices. It's about setting and enforcing the rules of the game so that the game can be played fairly by everyone, allowing the invisible hand to effectively guide individual efforts towards collective prosperity. It's not a call for anarchy or unfettered laissez-faire in the modern sense. It's a sophisticated call for an ordered liberty, where individual freedom is balanced by societal rules. It's a deeply nuanced understanding that is, regrettably, often lost or oversimplified in popular interpretations. The invisible hand isn't an excuse for the powerful to exploit the weak. It's a profound description of how, within a system of clearly defined laws, justice, and property rights, individual efforts to better one's own condition can inadvertently contribute to the wealth, well-being, and advancement of an entire nation. It's a truly powerful and enduring idea, once you grasp its full, intricate implications. Welcome back, everyone. In our last chapter, we looked at how Smith saw the division of labor as this incredible engine for productivity, churning out more goods than ever before. Now, let's pivot a little, because all that efficient production raises a truly fundamental question. How do we even begin to measure the worth of what's being produced? How do we value things? This brings us to what I find one of the most fascinating and, frankly, perpetually perplexing discussions in Smith's work, and indeed, in economics, the true price of things. It's a concept that seems simple on the surface, but quickly unravels into philosophical depths. Smith grapples head-on with something that later economists famously dubbed the diamond water paradox. And it's a brilliant thought experiment. Think about it with me for a moment. What's more absolutely essential for human life? Unquestionably, it's water, right? We literally cannot survive for more than a few days without it. It possesses immense utility, an immeasurable value in use for our very existence. And yet, in most parts of the world, water is incredibly cheap, often almost free. You can fill a glass from your tap for pennies, if that. Now, let's consider diamonds. What do they do for us? Absolutely nothing in terms of survival. You don't need a single diamond to live a fulfilling, healthy life. They have virtually no value in use in a practical, survival sense. Yet, diamonds command truly astronomical prices. A tiny polished stone, perhaps smaller than your fingernail, can be worth more than a whole lake of perfectly drinkable water. It's absurd when you think about it purely from a survival perspective. This striking paradox highlights Smith's crucial distinction between these two types of value in use and value in exchange. Water has exceptionally high value in use, but typically very low value in exchange. Diamonds, conversely, have extraordinarily low value in use, but incredibly high value in exchange. Smith was profoundly interested in understanding what determined this value in exchange, because that's what drives trade, market prices, and ultimately, a nation's wealth. He couldn't quite reconcile the two directly, the subjective nature of utility versus the objective reality of market prices, and many thinkers struggled with this for centuries, until marginal utility theory finally provided a more comprehensive answer much later. But Smith, with his incredible insight, offered his own powerful and foundational idea. For Adam Smith, the real price of anything, the fundamental, intrinsic measure of its value, wasn't found in its utility or even in the fleeting number on its monetary tag. No, he argued, the real price was found in the toil and trouble it took to acquire it. In simpler, more accessible terms, it was the labor. Imagine a hunter-gatherer society, far removed from complex markets. If I spend a whole exhausting day tracking and hunting a deer, and you spend an equally strenuous day fishing for salmon, then, in Smith's initial theoretical framework, that deer and that salmon are roughly equivalent in their real price. It doesn't matter what shiny shells we might eventually exchange them for, the true cost is the human effort, the sweat of the brow, the time, the skill, and the exertion embodied in the product. That, for Smith, is the true, underlying real price. And this concept of labor as the ultimate measure of value is incredibly profound and powerful for Smith's larger economic model. He saw labor as the ultimate, universal equivalent, an invariant standard. Think about it: money, gold, silver, these are constantly fluctuating in their purchasing power. A pound sterling today simply won't buy you what a pound sterling bought in Shakespeare's time, or even 20 years ago. The value of currency erodes, it inflates, it shifts. But the fundamental effort of a day's work, or an hour's skilled craftsmanship, remains relatively constant as a human experience. It's an imperfect measure, absolutely. Smith himself acknowledged that the quality of labor, the intensity of effort, the unique skill involved, these all complicate things immensely. A surgeon's hour isn't the same as a ditch digger's hour in terms of market compensation. But Smith focused on the underlying expenditure of human energy. He viewed it as providing a bedrock, a consistent standard, a way to compare true value across vast stretches of time and different cultures, independent of the shifting sands of currency. A man's labor, he famously argues, is his original purchase money that was paid for all things. It's the constant, intrinsic value that underlies the surface. This leads us directly to the critically important contrast between what he called the real price and the nominal price. The real price, as we've established, is the value expressed in terms of the labor it took to produce or acquire it. It's the inherent cost in human effort, relatively stable and constant. The nominal price, on the other hand, is simply its value expressed in money, how many shillings or pounds or dollars you have to pay for it. Money, for Smith, is merely a representative, a convenient tool for facilitating exchange, but its own value is inherently unstable. It's like a measuring tape that keeps stretching and shrinking. If a loaf of bread costs 1 shilling today and 2 shillings next year, its nominal price has doubled. But has the real price, the actual labor required to grow the wheat, mill the flour, bake the bread, truly doubled in that short time? Almost certainly not. It's the money, the medium of exchange, that has changed its own value, not the fundamental human effort embodied in the bread. Understanding this vital distinction is absolutely crucial to grasping Smith's overall argument about how nations become wealthy. He's deliberately trying to strip away the monetary illusion, the focus on mere gold and silver, and get to the very core of what truly makes a nation wealthy. It's not the accumulation of precious metals. He had already convincingly dismantled the mercantilist view. Instead, it's the productive capacity of its people to create goods and services, measured in the toil and trouble expended. This foundational idea, that labor is the source and the truest measure of value, would go on to profoundly influence thinkers for centuries. It even formed the basis for entirely different, sometimes opposing, economic theories, such as those of Karl Marx. It's a powerful, if ultimately incomplete, attempt by Smith to get to the heart of what value truly means in our economic lives, and it sets the stage for much of what follows in his grand inquiry. So, we've talked about how the division of labor, this fantastic specialization where everyone focuses on what they do best, dramatically increases productivity. But here's the thing: once everyone specializes, you have a whole bunch of people producing a lot of one specific good, and needing a lot of other specific goods. I make shoes, you bake bread, someone else weaves cloth. How do we get what we need from each other? The most obvious answer, historically, was barter. Direct exchange. I give you my shoes, you give me your bread. Sounds simple enough, right? But Adam Smith, with his incredible observational eye, immediately points out the massive, often crippling, inefficiencies of a purely barter economy. Imagine for a moment that I, the shoemaker, have finished a beautiful pair of boots. I need bread. So, I go looking for a baker. Now, what if the baker I find already has shoes, or doesn't need shoes at all? Or what if he needs shoes, but thinks my boots aren't worth as much bread as I do? This, my friends, is the classic double coincidence of wants problem. For a direct exchange to happen, I not only have to find someone who has what I want, but that person also has to want what I have. And the value has to align. Think about the sheer waste of time and effort. I might spend days just trying to find the right person for a single transaction. It's like trying to find two specific puzzle pieces that perfectly fit each other, but you only have a few hours to search through a mountain of pieces. This system is slow, it's frustrating, and it severely limits the scope of exchange, thus limiting the benefits of specialized labor. How can you have a complex economy when every transaction is such a struggle? Humans, being ingenious creatures, instinctively sought a solution. And it wasn't a decree from on high, it was an organic evolution. People started to realize that certain commodities were more readily accepted by everyone. It wasn't about what you specifically wanted from me, but what everyone would accept as payment, because they knew they could then use that item to get what they wanted from someone else. What kind of items? Well, they had to be useful, or at least highly desired, by a lot of people. More importantly, they needed specific characteristics to function as a universal medium. Think about it: my shoes don't last forever. Bread spoils. But what about things that are durable? That don't lose their value quickly. That can be easily divided into smaller units for smaller purchases, or combined for larger ones. And that are portable enough to carry around. Over time, different societies gravitated towards different things: salt, because it was essential for preservation; cattle, a sign of wealth; shells, exotic and hard to fake. But eventually, a clear winner emerged: precious metals, gold and silver. Why? Because they tick all the boxes with remarkable elegance. They don't corrode or spoil durability. They can be melted down and cast into exact weights, or shaved off for smaller amounts divisibility. They're compact and relatively light for their value portability. And crucially, they're naturally scarce, making them inherently valuable, not easily replicable. So, with these accepted commodities, especially precious metals, money was born. And it serves two absolutely critical functions that revolutionize trade. First, it acts as a medium of exchange. Now, I, the shoemaker, don't need to find a baker who wants my shoes. I sell my shoes for gold. That gold is universally accepted. Then, I take that gold and buy bread from the baker, who accepts it because he knows he can use it to buy whatever he needs. The double coincidence problem vanishes. Transactions become smooth, efficient, and frequent. Second, and equally important, money becomes a measure of value, or a unit of account. How do you compare the worth of a cow to a bushel of wheat in a barter system? It's clunky, subjective, and constantly shifting. But with money, everything can be expressed in a common denominator. This loaf of bread is 5 pieces of silver. Those shoes are 20 pieces of silver. A cow might be 500 pieces of silver. This allows for easy comparison, for economic calculation, for understanding prices, and for planning. It brings clarity to the chaos of disparate goods. But here's the profound, underlying truth. Whether we're talking about ancient gold coins or the digital numbers on your bank screen today, money fundamentally relies on trust. When a piece of gold was stamped with the king's image, it wasn't just a fancy decoration, it was a guarantee, a promise from the authority that this coin contained a certain weight and purity of metal. It fostered trust. And even with our modern fiat currencies, paper money not backed by a physical commodity like gold, the trust is even more explicit. We all agree, implicitly, that this piece of paper, this digit in a computer, holds value because the government stands behind it, and because everyone else will accept it. It's a collective act of faith in a system. Adam Smith understood that this invention, the seemingly simple idea of money, was not just a convenience. It was an absolutely essential lubricant for the engine of commerce. Without it, the division of labor, the specialization, the burgeoning markets he observed, simply couldn't have grown to the scale they did. Money transformed localized, personal exchanges into a vast, impersonal, and incredibly efficient network of global trade. It's the invisible scaffolding that supports the entire edifice of economic wealth, built on the foundation of shared trust. All right, so we've explored the division of labor, this incredible force that multiplies productivity, making each person incredibly skilled at one small task. But how does it actually happen? Who's paying the piper? Who's providing the tools and materials? While all this magnificent specialization takes place, this brings us directly to a concept Adam Smith calls stock, which we now largely call capital. It is the engine that fuels the entire economic machine, directly enabling the division of labor to thrive. Imagine you're an entrepreneur looking to set up a small manufacturing workshop. You have this brilliant idea to divide your tasks. One person cuts the raw material, another shapes it, a third assembles components, and a fourth applies the finishing touches. This specialization is going to make you incredibly efficient. But before you can sell a single finished product, you have expenses. Your specialized workers need to be paid wages so they can eat and live. You need to buy the raw materials. You need the actual tools and machinery for each specialized task. All of these resources, accumulated and ready for use before any revenue comes in, that's your stock. Smith, with his meticulous observation, differentiates stock into 2 main categories. First, there's the part of your stock that's reserved for immediate consumption. Think of it like your personal pantry or your wardrobe. The food you eat, the clothes you wear, the roof over your head. These are goods that are consumed and gone, satisfying your immediate needs and comfort, but not directly creating new wealth for sale or investment. They are, in essence, the end point of a previous economic cycle. Then, there's the other, and in Smith's view, the truly dynamic and economically critical part of your stock, what he calls capital. This is the portion of your stock that you specifically expect to yield a revenue or profit. It's not about immediate gratification, it's entirely about future gain, about generating more wealth. This capital itself manifests in a couple of essential forms. There's fixed capital, things like your specialized machinery, your factory buildings, your improvements to land, even the acquired and useful abilities of your inhabitants, or what we now call human capital. These are durable assets that don't constantly change hands, but are indispensable for ongoing production. And then there's circulating capital, your raw materials that will be transformed, your work in progress, the finished goods you have on hand ready to be sold, and crucially, the money you use to pay wages and purchase those materials. This circulating capital is in constant motion, transforming, being sold, and ideally, being reinvested. So, where does this crucial, wealth-generating capital come from? It certainly doesn't appear out of thin air. Smith is absolutely clear on this point. It comes from saving. He uses the wonderfully evocative, if slightly old-fashioned, term parsimony, which simply means frugality, thrift, or abstinence from immediate consumption. Every penny, every resource, every bit of income that you don't spend on immediate wants and pleasures, but instead set aside for future productive use, that is capital accumulation. Think about it this way. If you earn $100 today, and you spend all $100 on a truly delicious, but ultimately temporary, meal and an evening's entertainment, you've satisfied an immediate desire. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But if you spend $80 on that enjoyment, and consciously choose to save $20, those $20 are now available to be invested. They can buy a small, more efficient tool for your workshop, or pay for a few hours of skilled labor, or purchase a small amount of additional raw material. That deliberate act of saving, of deferring immediate gratification, is the fundamental and unyielding source of capital growth. This idea is powerful, because it places the ultimate responsibility for economic progress squarely on individual and collective choices. When individuals or businesses choose to consume less than they produce, they free up resources that can be channeled into capital formation. And this newly formed capital, in turn, becomes the indispensable lifeblood of specialization and further economic development. How so, specifically? Well, imagine a business wants to expand its operations, or simply wants to implement a more sophisticated and efficient division of labor. To achieve this, they need to acquire specialized machinery that boosts productivity. They need to pay workers for their time and effort before the finished product is actually sold and revenue is generated. They might even need to invest in training their workforce to perform these specialized tasks. All of this requires a significant upfront investment of capital. If there's no accumulated stock, no saved resources, then these vital investments simply cannot happen. The potential for specialization, however brilliant the idea, remains unrealized. Without this buffer of capital, a highly specialized weaver, for instance, might be forced to interrupt their weaving to grow their own food, or to laboriously build their own loom, or to personally search for and process their own raw cotton. But with sufficient capital, with enough saved resources, that weaver can be paid a steady wage, ensuring they have food, shelter, and other necessities, while they focus entirely, undistracted, on their highly specialized and efficient weaving. The entrepreneur, the capitalist, uses their accumulated stock to bridge the essential time gap between the initial investment in production and the eventual sale of goods, allowing workers to specialize deeply and become incredibly efficient. It's like a robust fuel tank that allows the engine of production to run smoothly, powerfully, and at high efficiency without sputtering or stopping. Let's ground this with a very simple and timeless analogy, one that Adam Smith himself would have appreciated: the farmer and their seeds. Imagine a farmer who has just harvested their crop. They have a barn full of grain. They could, if they chose, indulge in lavish spending, eating every single grain, having a massive feast, sharing it with neighbors, and enjoying immediate, fleeting prosperity. But what would inevitably happen next spring? There would be nothing left to plant. No seeds means no next harvest, leading to hardship and starvation. That's a classic short-term gain for a long-term, catastrophic disaster. A prudent farmer, however, embodies parsimony. They consciously set aside a vital portion of that harvested grain, ideally, the best, healthiest seeds, specifically for the next planting season. They don't eat those seeds. They don't sell them for immediate consumption. They treat them as sacred capital. Those saved seeds are their crucial investment in all future harvests. The immediate gratification of consuming all their harvest is deliberately deferred, but in doing so, the potential for much greater future wealth and prosperity is created. The more seeds the farmer intelligently saves and wisely plants, the larger the potential harvest next year. This larger harvest, in turn, allows for even more seeds to be saved, and perhaps investments in better tools or additional help. This is precisely how Smith envisions capital accumulation working at a societal level. It's a continuous, self-reinforcing cycle. Conscious saving leads to accumulated capital. Accumulated capital enables greater specialization and productive investment, which leads to vastly increased production, which in turn generates more income, allowing for even more saving and further capital accumulation. It's a truly profound insight. It tells us that the wealth of nations isn't just about individual hard work or brilliant ideas, though these are certainly important. It's fundamentally and structurally about the societal ability and willingness to defer immediate consumption, to practice parsimony, to save, to invest wisely, and thereby to provide the necessary resources, the capital, that allows the division of labor to flourish and for economic growth to become a continuous process. Without capital, our complex, specialized, and prosperous modern world simply couldn't exist. It's the silent, often invisible, but utterly indispensable force that underpins our entire economic structure. All right? So far we've been talking about the division of labor, how markets work, and the idea of value. But Smith wasn't just interested in what things cost, but who gets paid when something is bought and sold. This brings us to a really foundational concept in the wealth of nations, one that helps us understand the structure of society itself, and how wealth is distributed. Chapter 6, fittingly titled "Of the Component Parts of the Price of Commodities," is where he lays this out. It's all about breaking down the price tag on absolutely everything into its most fundamental elements. Think of it like looking at a beautifully plated meal, and then understanding exactly which ingredients went into it, and where each one came from. Smith argues that every single price, every single penny you spend, is ultimately resolved into three distinct kinds of income. These are the three great original sources of all revenue, as he puts it, and they correspond to the three great classes of every civilized society: laborers, owners of stock or capital, and landowners. It's a powerful lens through which to view economic activity. First up, we have wages. This one is probably the most straightforward to grasp, because it's something many of us experience directly. Wages are simply the income earned by laborers. It's the reward for their effort, their skill, their time, their physical and mental exertion. When you hire someone to bake bread, to fix your car, to write code, or to build a house, the money you pay them for their work, their personal input, that's their wage. Smith sees labor as the original purchase money that was paid for all things. In the early, rude state of society, before the appropriation of land and the accumulation of stock, the whole produce of labor belonged to the laborer. But in a more advanced state, a portion of that produce goes elsewhere. Still, the laborer needs to live, to eat, to provide for their family. So, a significant part of the price of any good or service must always go towards paying the people who actually do the work. It's the compensation for the human effort expended. Pretty simple, right? It's the bedrock of individual income for the vast majority of people. Next, we move to profit. Now, this is where it gets a little more nuanced, and where Smith introduces a character he calls the undertaker, which we would now largely understand as an entrepreneur or capitalist. Profit is the return on the capital invested by this undertaker. Imagine our baker again. They don't just bake bread, they also bought the oven, the mixer, the flour, the yeast, the sugar, the lease on the shop. All of that is their capital, their stock. When they sell a loaf of bread, part of that price needs to cover not just their own labor if they're working in the shop and the wages of any employees, but also a return on the money they put into setting up the business in the first place. That return is profit. It compensates the undertaker for the risk they took by investing their capital, for their foresight, and for their management of the whole operation. It's not just another form of wages for their superintendents. Smith is quite clear on this distinction. If you invest a large sum, you expect a greater return than if you invest a small sum, even if the effort of superintendents is the same. Profit is, therefore, entirely distinct from wages. It is the revenue derived from stock, from capital put to work. Without the prospect of profit, no one would bother to accumulate capital and employ it productively. And finally, we have rent. This is the income earned by landowners. Rent arises from the use of land, which Smith views as a natural monopoly. When you buy that loaf of bread, part of its price will eventually make its way to the person who owns the land where the wheat was grown, or the land where the bakery stands, or even the land where the flour mill processes the grain. It's paid for the use of the original powers of the soil. Unlike wages, which are for labor, or profit, which is for capital, rent is paid simply for the permission to use a particular piece of land, or the resources found on it. It's a payment for something that exists independently of human labor or capital investment, something that nature has provided. The landlord neither toils nor spins, yet they receive a share of the produce. This is a fascinating concept because it highlights how different factors of production, labor, capital, and land each lay claim to a share of the final price of a commodity. Rent, then, is essentially the payment for access to and use of natural resources or advantageous locations. So, how do these three fit together? This is the core insight of Chapter 6. Smith argues that the natural price of everything, and remember, the natural price is what it costs to bring a good to market, covering all expenses at their usual rate, is a composite of these three payments. Take that loaf of bread again. Its natural price is made up of 1. The wages paid to the farmhands who grew the wheat, the millers who ground it, the bakers who baked it, and the drivers who delivered it to. The profit for the farmer who invested in seeds and equipment, the miller who invested in the mill, and the baker who invested in the bakery ovens and ingredients. 3. The rent paid to the landowner for the agricultural land where the wheat grew, and for the commercial land where the bakery operates. Every single item you encounter, from the simplest tool to the most complex piece of technology, carries within its price these three fundamental components. When you buy a shirt, a portion goes to the factory workers' wages, a portion goes to the factory owners' and shareholders' profit, and a portion might go to the landlord of the factory or the cotton field's rent. Smith is essentially giving us an accounting framework for the entire economy. He's showing us that what appears as a single price at the point of sale is actually a financial mosaic, reflecting the contributions and claims of different groups within society. This isn't just an academic exercise either. Understanding this breakdown is crucial for grasping how wealth is distributed in an economy. When prices go up or down, it impacts these three components differently. If wages rise, profits might fall, or vice versa. If land becomes scarcer, rents might increase. This framework helps explain why different people in society have different levels and types of income. It helps us see the intricate web of economic relationships that underlies every transaction. Smith isn't saying that these three components are always equal or fair, but rather that they are the irreducible elements into which the price of any commodity must ultimately resolve. It's a fundamental understanding of how value is created, distributed, and claimed by the different factors of production: labor, capital, and land. It provides a powerful analytical tool for looking beyond the simple price tag and seeing the underlying economic structure. It's a real light bulb moment when you connect how every purchase you make ultimately fuels these three distinct streams of income for different classes of people. It's truly a testament to Smith's genius that this framework remains so relevant today. All right, so far we've peeled back a few layers of Adam Smith's economic onion. We've talked about the division of labor, the invisible hand, and how people pursuing their own interests creates efficiency. Now, we're diving into something fundamental: how prices actually work. Welcome to Chapter 7, The Market's Gravitational Pull. This is where Smith gives us a framework to understand why some things are expensive one day and cheaper the next, but always seem to hover around a certain point. Let's start with Smith's natural price. Don't confuse this with anything mystical. Think of it as the baseline, the absolute minimum an item needs to sell for over the long run for its producers to keep making it. It's the cost of production, broken into fundamental components. For Smith, this natural price must cover three things. First, the natural rate of wages for workers. Second, the natural rate of profit for the entrepreneur, compensating them for risk and capital. And third, if land is involved, the natural rate of rent. If an item consistently sells below its natural price, producers will eventually stop making it. It's not sustainable. It's the economic bedrock, the floor beneath which production grinds to a halt. Then we have the market price. This is what you and I actually see when we go shopping, what something sells for at any given moment. Unlike the long-term natural price, the market price is a creature of the immediate. It's determined by the short-term interplay of supply and demand. A sudden surge in demand, or a sudden shortage in supply, will jump the market price. A heat wave drives up air conditioner prices. A poor harvest sends fruit prices soaring. These are market prices reacting to the here and now, reflecting immediate scarcity or abundance relative to current desire. It's the volatile number you see on a price tag today. Now, here's Smith's genius, and where the market's gravitational pull comes into play. Smith observed that while market prices can bounce around due to immediate supply and demand, they are constantly, relentlessly, pulled back towards that natural price. The force doing this pulling. Competition. Imagine the natural price as the Earth's center, and the market price as a satellite orbiting it. Sometimes it drifts out, sometimes in, but gravity, competition, always tries to bring it back to a stable orbit, back to that sustainable baseline. How? If the market price of an item is significantly above its natural price, producers are making high profits. Other producers see this and jump in, increasing supply. This increased supply pushes the market price down. Conversely, if the market price falls below the natural price, producers lose money or break even. They leave the market, reducing supply. This scarcity pushes the market price back up. It's a self-correcting mechanism, driven by the self-interest of producers chasing profits and consumers seeking deals. Elegant in its simplicity. Let's use a modern example, a brand new, highly anticipated tech gadget. Think a new smartphone or game console on launch day. The market price is often sky high, far above its natural price. The actual cost of components, assembly, and marketing. Early adopters pay a premium for first-on-the-block status, but what happens a few months or a year later? That price almost always comes down. Why? Other manufacturers replicate the success, creating competing products, increasing supply, or the original manufacturer, having recouped R&D, optimizes production, achieving economies of scale, making components cheaper, assembly more efficient. These factors push the market price back towards that natural price, the sustainable cost of making the gadget and giving creators reasonable profit. Eventually, you see promotions, discounts, a second edition. This isn't charity, it's the market's gravitational pull in action. Competition working to find equilibrium where the producer is fairly compensated, and the consumer gets a fair deal based on underlying costs. So, Smith's distinction between natural and market price, and competition acting as a gravitational force, provides a powerful lens. It helps us understand why prices aren't random, why they fluctuate, but also why they don't just infinitely spiral. They constantly seek that sustainable sweet spot, pulled there by the invisible hand of the market. It's a dynamic that defines so much of our economic landscape. Okay, so we've explored the division of labor, the invisible hand, and how markets generally work when left to their own devices. But it's crucial to remember that Adam Smith wasn't writing in a vacuum. He was critiquing a very specific, deeply ingrained economic philosophy that dominated his era, mercantilism. And honestly, it's a concept that still rears its head in various guises today, so understanding Smith's takedown of it is incredibly important. Imagine, if you will, the world before Smith. The prevailing wisdom was simple, perhaps deceptively so. A nation's wealth, it was widely believed, was directly proportional to the amount of gold and silver it held in its treasury. Think about it, gleaming piles of bullion, precious metals, that was the ultimate measure of power, of prosperity. This idea, this core tenet, is what defined mercantilism. It sounds intuitive, right? More shiny stuff means you're richer, but Smith saw through this shimmering facade. From this central misconception flowed a whole host of policies designed to accumulate and hoard these precious metals. First, there was protectionism. Governments implemented high tariffs and duties on imported goods. The logic: if you buy foreign goods, your gold goes out of the country. If you sell your own goods abroad, gold flows in. So, the goal was always to export as much as possible and import as little as possible. Keep that gold at home. Then came trade monopolies. Think of the powerful East India Company, granted exclusive rights by the Crown to trade with vast regions. These weren't just companies, they were extensions of state power, often backed by military force, ensuring that the profits, and thus the gold, flowed back to the mother country. No free competition here, it was about state-sanctioned control. And underpinning all of this was the idea that international trade was a zero-sum game. My gain must be your loss. If England gets richer, it must be at the expense of France or Spain or the colonies. It was a constant economic battle, a scramble for limited resources, primarily gold and silver. Exporting was winning, importing was losing. Accumulate, don't share. Sound familiar? We still hear echoes of this thinking today, unfortunately. But Smith, with his characteristic clarity, looked at this and said, "Hold on a minute. This isn't right." He argued that focusing solely on a nation's stockpile of gold and silver was fundamentally misguided. It was like confusing the money in your wallet with your actual ability to earn a living, to produce value. Smith's revolutionary counter-argument was profound in its simplicity. A nation's true wealth isn't its gold and silver. Those are merely the tools of exchange, the circulating medium. No, the real measure of a nation's prosperity, its actual wealth, lies in the annual produce of its land and labor. In other words, it's the total sum of all the goods and services that its people can produce each year. Its productive capacity. The food it grows, the clothes it makes, the houses it builds, the knowledge it creates. That's real wealth. And once you grasp this, once you understand that wealth is about productive capacity, the flaws in mercantilist policies become glaringly obvious. Take those high tariffs, for instance. By placing heavy duties on imported goods, governments aimed to protect domestic industries and keep gold at home. But what was the practical effect? Consumers ended up paying more for everything. If British textiles were protected from cheaper French imports, British consumers had to buy more expensive, potentially lower quality British textiles. Their real purchasing power, their ability to acquire useful goods, diminished. This didn't make the nation richer, it made its citizens poorer. It raised the costs of living, stifled innovation by reducing competition, and ultimately led to a less efficient allocation of resources. The nation might have more gold sitting in a vault, but its people had less stuff, less food, fewer clothes, fewer comforts. It was a classic case of sacrificing substance for appearance. Mercantilist monopolies, too, were a disaster for the general populace. They might enrich a few favored merchants or a specific industry, but they did so by limiting choices, inflating prices, and often producing inferior goods for everyone else. The entire point of an efficient economy, according to Smith, was to maximize the output of useful goods and services for the greatest number of people. Mercantilism did the opposite. So, where mercantilism saw international trade as a win-lose zero-sum game, where one nation's gain must come at another's expense, Smith offered a radically different, and far more optimistic, vision. He argued that international trade, when left free from artificial barriers, is in fact a win-win proposition. Think about it, if Portugal is really good at producing wine, and England is really good at producing cloth, why would either country try to produce both inefficiently? It makes far more sense for Portugal to specialize in wine, England in cloth, and then for them to trade. Both nations benefit. They both get more wine and more cloth than if they tried to be self-sufficient. Each country can focus on what it does best, using its unique resources and skills, and then exchange the surplus. This division of labor, this specialization, works not just within a factory, but across entire nations. It expands the overall pie, rather than just reshuffling existing slices. Smith's argument was a monumental paradigm shift. He moved the conversation from how do we get more gold to how do we produce more useful goods and services. He changed the lens from a narrow focus on state treasuries to a broader understanding of the real, tangible wealth and productive capacity of an entire population. This wasn't just an economic theory, It was a philosophical declaration of interdependence and mutual benefit, laying the groundwork for much of the globalized world we inhabit today. And understanding this fundamental shift is absolutely essential to grasping the true revolutionary power of the wealth of nations. All right, so we've delved into the inner workings of a nation, the bustling marketplaces, the ingenious division of labor. Now, let's zoom out a bit, beyond national borders, because Smith wasn't just thinking locally. He was laying the groundwork for a truly global understanding of wealth. And in this chapter, he introduces an idea that, at the time, was truly revolutionary, even a bit scandalous for many: the concept of free trade. It's all about letting go of the misguided notion that a country must try to produce everything it needs itself, and instead, embracing the power of mutual benefit through exchange. Smith starts with an analogy so simple, so undeniably human, that it's hard to argue with it. Think about your own household for a moment. Do you, or does your family, endeavor to make absolutely everything you consume or use? Do you weave your own clothes, bake all your bread from scratch, grow all your vegetables, fix your own car engine, build your own furniture, or even cut your own hair? Of course not. That would be absurd, incredibly time-consuming, and almost certainly result in inferior products compared to what you can get from a specialist. You go to the baker for bread, the mechanic for your car, the hairdresser for a cut, and the furniture store for a table. Why? Because it's cheaper, better, and certainly more efficient to let others do what they're good at, while you focus on what you do best, earning the money to buy those goods and services. Smith applied this exact, common-sense logic directly to nations. He asked, why should countries operate any differently? This is where he introduces the powerful concept of absolute advantage. Imagine two countries. Let's call one grapeland, blessed with abundant sunshine and fertile soil, making it exceptionally good at growing grapes and producing wine. It can produce a barrel of wine with relatively little labor and land. Now, imagine another country, wool land, which has vast pastures and a climate perfect for sheep, making it incredibly efficient at producing wool and cloth. Wool land can produce a bolt of cloth with far less effort than grapeland. According to Smith, grapeland has an absolute advantage in wine production, wool land has an absolute advantage in wool production. What would be the sensible approach for these two nations? Should grapeland try to force sheep farming in unsuitable terrain, wasting resources and producing poor quality wool at great expense? And should wool land try to cultivate vineyards in its less hospitable climate, yielding meager harvests and costly wine? No! Smith's point was crystal clear. Each nation should specialize in producing the goods in which it has an absolute advantage. They should focus all their efforts, all their resources, on producing what they can do most efficiently and with the least cost, and then simply trade for everything else. Grapeland produces wine, wool land produces wool, and they exchange. It's not about one nation winning and another losing. It's about both nations using their resources optimally, resulting in more overall production for everyone. Now, consider the profound ripple effect of this specialization and trade. When nations engage in free trade, when grapeland pours all its energy into wine and wool land into wool, they aren't just producing for their own domestic needs. They're producing for a much, much bigger market. Grapeland is making wine not just for its own citizens, but also for the thirsty people of wool land. Wool land is producing cloth not just for its own population, but also for the residents of grapeland. This expansion of the market is absolutely crucial. Remember how the division of labor, that engine of productivity we talked about earlier, thrives on the size of the market. Well, international trade blows that market wide open, connecting producers to potentially millions, even billions, of new customers. With a larger customer base, producers have an even greater incentive to specialize further, to refine their techniques, to invest in new technologies, and to find ever more efficient ways of doing things. It creates a powerful, virtuous cycle. Specialization leads to trade. Trade expands the market. The expanded market encourages even greater division of labor and innovation, which further boosts efficiency, lowers costs, and increases overall production. Everyone benefits. So, what does all this intricate economic theory and international specialization mean for you and me, the everyday person? Simply put, it means a better life. When nations specialize and trade freely, competition naturally increases. Producers from different countries are all vying for your business. What happens then? Prices tend to go down, because efficiency drives down costs, and competition keeps them keen. You, the consumer, get more choices, a greater variety of goods, because you're no longer limited to what your own country can produce or wants total. And crucially, the quality often goes up. Why? Because if you're competing on a global stage, you have to be good, really good. You have to innovate, you have to meet high standards, and you have to satisfy discerning customers from all over the world to stay in business. Think for a moment about your daily life. The coffee in your mug, perhaps from Brazil or Colombia. The smartphone in your hand, designed in California, assembled in China, with components from Korea, Germany, and Taiwan. The clothes you're wearing may be manufactured in Vietnam or Bangladesh. How many of those goods, or their constituent parts, are truly local to where you live? Probably very few. And, in Smith's radical view, that's precisely how it should be. We are all beneficiaries of this global network of specialization and exchange. Adam Smith wasn't just theorizing about abstract national economies, he was envisioning a world where everyone, from the humblest worker to the wealthiest merchant, could benefit from the incredible bounty and efficiency brought about by global cooperation. Free trade, in Smith's estimation, wasn't just an economic policy, it was a pathway to widespread prosperity and, dare I say, even peace, born from the simple, yet profoundly radical, idea of letting go of national self-sufficiency and embracing the immense power of mutual benefit. Alright, so we've spent a lot of time talking about markets, prices, the division of labor, and that famous invisible hand. And if you're like many people, when you hear Adam Smith and the idea of a free market, your mind might immediately jump to this picture of zero government, a complete hands-off approach, almost bordering on anarchy. It's a pretty common misconception, one that I encounter all the time when discussing Smith's work. But let me tell you, that couldn't be further from the truth of what Smith actually advocated for. In fact, Smith was incredibly clear, almost prescriptive, about the essential and limited roles he believed a government must play for a truly free and prosperous society to flourish. He wasn't suggesting an absent state, he was advocating for an effective state, one that understood its core responsibilities and stuck to them, creating the bedrock upon which individual enterprise could thrive. He laid out 3 primary duties for the sovereign, and they're really quite foundational. The first, and perhaps most obvious, duty for the government is to protect society from foreign invasion. Think about it, if your country is constantly under threat, if your borders aren't secure, then all the talk of economic growth, individual liberty, and flourishing commerce becomes pretty meaningless. Who's going to invest, who's going to build, who's going to innovate, if everything they create could be plundered or destroyed by an external enemy at any moment? So, the first order of business, according to Smith, is a robust national defense. It's about ensuring peace and security from abroad, a necessary prerequisite for any stable society, let alone a wealthy one. It's a common sense point, but one often overlooked when people try to paint Smith as some kind of anti-government extremist. Secondly, Smith argued that the government has a crucial role in establishing an exact administration of justice. Now, this might sound a bit formal, but what it really boils down to is protecting citizens from each other. This isn't just about catching criminals, though that's certainly part of it. It's about enforcing contracts, upholding property rights, and ensuring that disputes are settled fairly and impartially. Imagine trying to run a business, or even just live your daily life, if you couldn't trust that your agreements would be honored, or that your property wouldn't be stolen without consequence. It would be chaos, right? A system of justice provides the framework of trust and order that allows people to interact economically with confidence. It protects individual liberty by preventing individuals from infringing upon the liberties and property of others. Without a functioning, impartial justice system, the free market would quickly devolve into a might makes right scenario, which is the antithesis of a truly free society. And finally, Smith identified a third, equally vital duty: the creation and maintenance of certain public works and institutions. These are things that are absolutely necessary for a thriving society and economy, but which would be unprofitable for any private individual or small group of individuals to undertake. Think about it: who's going to build a nationwide network of roads and bridges? Or dig canals that benefit countless users, but might not yield a direct, immediate profit to the builder? These are projects with immense public utility, but dispersed benefits, making them unattractive for private capital alone. Smith also included things like basic education in this category, understanding that an educated populace is fundamental for both economic progress and good citizenship. He wasn't advocating for a massive welfare state, but rather for strategic investments in infrastructure and foundational services that enable the market to function more broadly and efficiently. These are investments in the common good that create the scaffolding for individual prosperity. So, when Smith talks about the system of natural liberty, he's not talking about a free-for-all, or some kind of utopian anarchy where everyone just does whatever they please. Far from it. What he's describing is freedom under the rule of law, within a stable and secure framework provided by a government diligently performing these specific, limited, but absolutely critical functions. The government isn't there to manage the economy or pick winners and losers in the marketplace. Instead, its role is to act as a kind of night watchman and an infrastructure builder, providing the essential services and the secure, predictable environment that allows individuals to pursue their own economic interests, knowing their efforts will be protected and their agreements enforced. It's about creating the conditions for liberty, not replacing it with state control. It's a subtle but profoundly important distinction, and it's key to truly understanding Adam Smith's vision for a prosperous nation. You know, there are few things in life as inevitable as, well, death and taxes. It's a classic line, attributed to Benjamin Franklin, but if you spend any time with Adam Smith, you quickly realize he was wrestling with these same eternal truths over 2 centuries ago. He understood that for any functioning society, taxes weren't just a necessary evil, they were the essential fuel that powered the state. But Smith, ever the keen observer, wasn't just concerned with the existence of taxes, but profoundly with their fairness and their efficiency. And he had some exceptionally strong opinions on the matter, which he distilled into a surprisingly modern framework. He laid out what he called his 4 maxims of taxation, principles that honestly still form the bedrock of tax policy debates today, proving their enduring wisdom. It's truly uncanny how relevant they remain. First, Smith argued that individuals should contribute to the support of the government as nearly as possible, in proportion to their respective abilities. This is our modern principle of proportionality, or the ability to pay. It means if you earn more, you contribute a greater share, not just in absolute terms, but as a fair percentage. This was a revolutionary idea in an age where tax burdens often fell disproportionately and cruelly on the poor. Second, he insisted that the tax a person pays ought to be certain, and not arbitrary. Imagine a world where the tax collector just showed up and arbitrarily decided what you owed. No fixed rules, no transparent rates, just the unpredictable caprice of an individual. That's exactly what Smith was pushing back against. He demanded clarity, transparency, and predictability. No one should be left guessing. Arbitrary taxes, he warned, breed corruption, injustice, and deep-seated resentment. Third, every tax ought to be levied at the time, or in the manner, which is most likely to be convenient for the contributor to pay it. This maxim is all about ease and practicality. If you tax farmers when their harvest is in, or wage earners when they receive their paychecks, it's simply easier for them to comply. This wasn't just about making life simpler for the taxpayer. It was a shrewd understanding that convenience minimizes hardship and encourages honest payment. We see this in our own pay-as-you-earn systems today. And finally, the 4th maxim: every tax ought to be so contrived as both to take out and to keep out of the pockets of the people as little as possible over and above what it brings into the public treasury. This one's purely about efficiency. The cost of collecting the tax shouldn't eat up a huge chunk of the actual tax revenue itself. If it costs the government $1 in administrative overhead to collect $1 in tax, then what's the effective point? Smith was saying that the tax system shouldn't be an additional drain on the national economy. We want the collected money to go to public services, not to a bloated, inefficient collection bureaucracy. Every penny spent on collection that doesn't reach the Treasury is, in Smith's view, a national waste. Beyond these maxims, Smith also had clear preferences for what specifically should be taxed. He leaned heavily towards taxing luxuries rather than necessities. Why? Because taxes on necessities disproportionately hurt the poor, making their already difficult lives even harder, potentially stifling their ability to contribute to the broader economy. Taxes on luxuries, on the other hand, fall more heavily on those who can comfortably afford them, and are often easier for individuals to avoid if they choose, simply by not purchasing the luxury item. It's a subtle but powerful point about economic incentives and social equity. But perhaps Smith's most prescient warnings, and certainly the ones that resonate most chillingly today, concern public debt. He looked at the burgeoning national debts of European nations, fueled by relentless wars and often by extravagant spending, and saw a clear path to a looming disaster. Smith was profoundly skeptical of governments accumulating massive debt, because he understood a fundamental truth: debts have to be paid back, or at least meticulously serviced, and that means future generations will inevitably bear the burden, often without having benefited from the original borrowing. He argued that when a government borrows, it diverts capital that could otherwise be used for productive investments in the private sector, capital that could build factories, improve farms, or fund innovative ventures. Instead, that money is used to finance current consumption, or worse, destructive wars. Over time, he warned, this habit would stifle genuine economic growth, leading to ever higher taxes to pay the interest on the debt, and eventually, to pervasive financial instability and even national bankruptcy. He saw it as a corrosive force, slowly but surely eating away at the nation's wealth, eroding its future prosperity, and stifling the very engine of progress. It was, for him, a moral as well as an economic failing. Think about that for a second. This was written well over 250 years ago. Yet, if you open any newspaper, or turn on any news channel today, what are we constantly talking about? Debates about tax fairness, the efficiency of tax collection, whether to tax carbon or plastic, and, perhaps most vociferously, the ever-growing national debt in countries worldwide. Smith's maxims about certainty and convenience, his preference for taxing luxuries, and his almost apocalyptic warnings about public debt aren't just fascinating historical curiosities. They are living, breathing principles that continue to shape, inform, and often dominate our modern economic discourse. It just goes to show you, some ideas truly are timeless. So, we've spent a fair bit of time diving deep into the wealth of nations, exploring its revolutionary ideas about markets, productivity, and the division of labor. And for many, this is where their understanding of Adam Smith begins and ends. He's often pigeonholed as the father of capitalism, sometimes even unfairly blamed for its perceived excesses. But to truly understand Smith, to grasp the full scope of his genius, we absolutely have to rewind a bit, back to his earlier, equally profound work, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. Think of it this way: if the wealth of nations gave us the blueprint for how societies become prosperous, the theory of moral sentiments provided the ethical and psychological bedrock upon which such a society must be built. It's the invisible foundation that supports the entire structure, grounding economic activity in human morality. In this earlier book, Smith introduces a concept that's absolutely crucial: the impartial spectator. Imagine it as an inner voice, an idealized, objective observer within each of us. This spectator isn't some external judge, it's the internalized voice of society, a mental construct that allows us to step outside ourselves and evaluate our own actions and feelings through the lens of how others would perceive them. Would they approve? Would they sympathize? This desire for approval, this yearning for what Smith called mutual sympathy of sentiments, profoundly influences our behavior. It's what encourages self-command, moderation, and a genuine consideration for others, even in our most seemingly selfish pursuits. We want to be worthy of praise, not just to receive it, constantly refining our conduct to align with this inner moral compass. Now, why is this so critical to understanding his economic thought? Because for Smith, the market isn't some cold, unfeeling machine operating in a moral vacuum. Far from it. He understood that economic exchange at its core is a deeply human, social institution. And like any social institution, it absolutely must be built on a robust foundation of empathy, trust, and justice. Think about it. Can you truly have a functioning market if people can't trust each other to uphold agreements? If contracts mean nothing? If there's no empathy to understand a customer's needs or a supplier's struggles? No. Smith recognized that these moral sentiments are the grease in the gears of commerce. We engage in trade because we trust that the other party will deliver on their promise, often based on their reputation. We value our reputation precisely because we know that the impartial spectator and therefore, society values honesty and fair dealing. A dishonest merchant soon finds no customers. Justice, meanwhile, is the bedrock, protecting property rights, ensuring contracts are enforced, and providing a stable framework within which individuals can interact and transact without fear of predation. Without these moral underpinnings, without the confidence that your property is safe and agreements will be honored, the market wouldn't just be less efficient, it simply wouldn't exist in any meaningful, sustainable way. It would devolve into chaos, turning every transaction into a high-stakes gamble. This brings us to a really important point dispelling the myth. The caricature of Adam Smith as the prophet of greedy, selfish, crony capitalism, of greed is good libertarianism, is a profound misreading. Those who reduce his entire philosophy to the phrase, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest," completely miss the forest for the trees. Yes, Smith acknowledged self-interest as a powerful motivator. But he also understood its limits and dangers, and crucially, the specific contexts in which it could yield positive outcomes. He was highly critical of merchants and manufacturers who colluded to fix prices or lobby the government for preferential treatment, what we'd call crony capitalism today. He railed against monopolies and restrictions on trade that benefited a few at the expense of the many, recognizing that such practices undermined the very principles of fair competition and broad prosperity he championed. His invisible hand was never meant to be a license for unchecked avarice. It was a description of how individual actions, when constrained by moral sentiments, and operating within a just legal framework, could unintentionally lead to collective good. It was about legitimate self-interest, balanced by a concern for reputation, and a fundamental understanding of what constitutes fair play in a society of mutual regard. Ultimately, Adam Smith's vision was far more nuanced and humane than he's often given credit for. He wasn't just advocating for economic growth for its own sake. His ultimate goal was a prosperous society, where free individuals could cooperate for mutual benefit. A society where people could pursue their own interests, yes, but always tempered by their conscience, that inner impartial spectator, and guided by strong institutions of justice. He envisioned a world where economic progress served the broader purpose of human flourishing, allowing more people to live lives of dignity, opportunity, and self-improvement. It's a holistic philosophy, one where economics and ethics are inextricably linked, forming a complete and compelling picture of human nature and societal progress. He saw human beings not as isolated economic units, but as social creatures whose prosperity was deeply intertwined with their moral obligations and their ability to live in a just and trusting community.